The story I'm about to tell you is about the rise of one of the greatest empires the world has ever seen. But this wasn't an empire that drew its power solely from swords or warriors on horseback. No, this empire grew by harnessing the harsh winds of the steppes, ancient wisdom, and the kind of bravery that pushes the limits of the human spirit. Today I'll tell you how the Mongol Empire rose to power and made the world bow to it. But first, let's travel back in time. Once upon a time, there were countless nomadic tribes living across vast, endless steppes. Among these tribes was a people riding their horses in what is now Mongolia. The hardships of a nomadic life had toughened them, making them one with the land. They were as fast as the wind, as silent and strong as the wolf of the steppe. But they were scattered, disconnected tribes, until one man emerged. This man was Temujin. From a young age, his destiny was marked by hardship. His family had been abandoned by their tribe, and he was tested by hunger and loneliness. But it was this very loneliness that would turn him into a leader. It's said that even as a young man, Temujin had a fire in his eyes that captivated everyone. No one was as determined as he was. This young man was preparing to unite the Mongol tribes and step onto the stage of history. But it wouldn't be easy. The path ahead was filled with enemies, betrayals, and countless obstacles. Back then, living on the steppe meant fighting for survival every single day. These tribes didn't live in luxury palaces or enjoy comfortable lives. They chased their herds and had to fight both enemies and nature with their swords. In such a world, Temujin began to catch the attention of other tribal leaders with his courage and intelligence. His greatest dream was to unite these scattered and constantly warring tribes under a single banner, giving them a single purpose to bring the Mongols onto the world stage. It's said that as Temujin moved towards leadership, he understood the spirit of the steppe. He listened to the whispers of the wind and perceived the hoofbeats of the horses almost like a melody. To him, war was won not just with swords but with the mind as well. And it was this mind that would make him one of history's greatest leaders. So how did one man manage to unite a people and challenge the entire world? This story is long, complex, and impactful. It starts on the steppes and spreads across the globe. And I'll tell you all about it. But first, you need to understand the spirit of this empire, the spirit of the Mongols. Because this isn't just a story of war and conquest. It's the story of people's struggle with nature, each other, and their own destinies. So take a deep breath, because I'm taking you on a long journey. Do you hear the roar of the wind? That's the sound of Mongol horses. And leading them is one of history's greatest conquerors, Genghis Khan. Ah, my friends. The story of the Mongols is as ancient as the sound of hooves racing against the wind and as vast as the endless horizons of the steppes. But this great empire once started as nothing more than a simple nomadic people. Yes, their story began in those boundless steppes, between cold nights and hot days. What I'm about to share is about the nomadic culture of the Mongols who lived on the harsh lands of Central Asia back then. They didn't live in cities like today's Mongols. A city? That word didn't even exist for them back then. Their home was the open, expansive plains. Their lives were shaped by the winds, the passing caravans, and the uncertain paths of these lands. Imagine waking up one morning with only the endless steppe around you. The grasslands stretching as far as the eye can see were both their home and their livelihood. Sheep, goats, horses. These animals were the lifeblood of the Mongols. They moved with their herds from place to place. Life on the steppe was harsh and tough, but it was also incredibly free. There were no high walls or castles, just the sky, the smell of the earth, and the swift steps of their horses. Born on horseback, these people raced with the wind. Children learned to ride before they even learned to walk. The bond between a person and their horse was almost as strong as their bond with their family. Because without horses, surviving on the steppe was nearly impossible. The Mongols grew up respecting the power of nature. With every gust of wind, every raindrop, they felt the spirit of the steppe. When a child was born, the first thing they were taught was the art of survival. Follow the wind, the elders would say. Go where the wind blows, because it will always lead you on the right path. Life on the steppe was all about constant movement and constant searching. These people chasing their herds were actually also chasing their own destinies. But even then, peace was elusive among the tribes. Imagine hundreds of small tribes, each loyal to its own leader. Each tribe was looking out for its own interests, constantly at war with one another. Many of these tribes were isolated from each other, sometimes allies, sometimes enemies. Each tribe had its own leader, but none was strong enough to unite all the tribes. This fragmentation brought weakness. Enemies took advantage of these conflicts between tribes, each fighting to establish its own rule. And in such a world, a child was born. His name was Temujin. Temujin. His story is another story altogether. A child who would one day lay the foundations for an empire that would conquer the world. But at that time, he was just focused on surviving. Temujin was no ordinary child. Even at birth, it seemed as if destiny was written on him. His father, Yesuji Bahadur, was a powerful leader, but Temujin's father was poisoned and died when Temujin was just 9 years old. That moment marked the beginning of a hard life for young Temujin. After his father's death, the tribe abandoned Temujin and his family. Imagine a child alone with his mother and siblings in the middle of the steppe, forced to fight against hunger, the cold, and enemies. But it was this solitude that forged him into a leader. It toughened him and taught him the real meaning of survival. It's said that Temujin combined his anger with a desire to survive during that time. He learned to see the hardships fate gave him as an opportunity. While striving to protect his family, he also thought about how to gather strength. Even as a young child, he believed that one day he would unite all these tribes. This belief was the fire inside him. Being a leader required more than just strength, it also needed intelligence, patience, and vision. Temujin had all these qualities. Over time, he began to gather companions around him, warriors who were loyal and shared his vision. Temujin's first big goal was to avenge his father. He prepared for years against the Taichi-Yud tribe that killed his father. And finally, he brought them to their knees. But this was just the beginning. Temujin had a bigger plan to unite all the Mongol tribes. At that time, the winds of the steppe started blowing in a different direction. Temujin's name echoed across the steppe, and the tribes began to recognize his power. People started gathering around him, pledging their loyalty. Because Temujin was not just a warrior, but also a great leader. He offered each tribe a hope, unity. These scattered tribes believed that under Temujin's leadership, they could become stronger together. And one day, Temujin was no longer just a tribal leader, but the head of all the Mongols. He was declared Genghis Khan, or the ruler of the universe. This wasn't just a title. It was a turning point that changed the fate of a people. Under Genghis Khan's leadership, the Mongols set their sights not just on controlling the steppe, but on the entire world. So, my friends, this is how the nomadic life of the Mongols and Temujin's tough youth began. Before becoming Genghis Khan, he was a child struggling to survive. But destiny would turn him into one of history's greatest emperors. Now, let's continue to explore how his arduous journey changed the world. My friends, we've reached the most thrilling, darkest, yet also brightest times of the steppe. Genghis Khan, or the Great Temujin, took his first major steps towards fulfilling his destiny. Remember, as a young man, he had already rallied his tribe and defeated his enemies. But his real goal was much bigger: to unite all the scattered tribes of the steppe under a single banner. This wasn't going to be easy. because each tribe was like a small kingdom in its own right. Each looked out for its own interests. Each thought its own leader was the greatest. And they were so proud that even considering uniting under someone else's leadership seemed like a weakness to them. But Temujin, he wasn't just a great leader because of his brute force, he was also smart. His leadership was based on power, yes, but this wasn't just power gained with sword and spear. Temujin knew how to rule the human spirit as well. He didn't rely solely on his sword to unite the tribes. Above all, he promised justice. He put justice and loyalty before everything else. He knew that power wasn't just won on the battlefield. It was won in hearts and minds. That's why when he approached each tribe, he gave them two options. They could either unite under his rule and become part of the Mongol people, or they could fight him and face destruction. Yet Temujin even promised justice to his enemies. If a tribe surrendered, he would protect them and respect their rights. Loyalty and trust. These were the foundations of his strategy, and people began to trust him for this reason. Temujin understood that uniting them wasn't just about shedding blood. He was creating a nation, and this nation had to rally around a common goal, showing the world the greatness of the Mongol people. Of course, not every tribe accepted this offer right away. Some resisted Temujin's leadership and weren't ready to submit. But Temujin fought ruthlessly against them too. He didn't just defeat his enemies, he managed to bring them to his side. He fought on the battlefield not only to destroy his rivals, but also to win them over to his cause. His enemies, even after being defeated, would remain loyal to him. Because Genghis Khan didn't just defeat them, he won them over. Friends, Temujin's strategy during this period echoed across the steppe. As tribes saw both his mercy and his power, they began to join him. Gradually, he became a name resonating across the steppe. Tribes were coming together not to fight each other, but to fight alongside Temujin. He was becoming not just a leader, but a symbol. The steppe people realized that uniting under his leadership would give them great power. This power wasn't just military. He also brought order and security to his people. He promised a system where everyone would be equal before the law. This was a revolutionary idea at the time. Instead of constant war and chaos between tribes, Temujin aimed to establish order. This order would become the foundation of the Mongol Empire. And friends, here comes the big day. The year is 1206. From all corners of the steppe, tribal leaders, warriors, scholars, and people gathered on the banks of the Yuan River for a grand assembly. This assembly would determine the future of the Mongol people. At this gathering, Temujin was recognized not just as a leader, but as a savior. There were those who loved him and those who feared him. But everyone accepted one truth: Temujin was the leader who would change their world.
At the center of the assembly, all the tribal leaders came together and declared Temujin as Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan. This title symbolized not just a leader, but an empire. Genghis Khan meant ruler of the universe. Now, Temujin would become the founder of an empire that would spread across the world. This declaration wasn't just a title, it marked the beginning of an era. It was the birth of the Mongol Empire. At that moment, it echoed in every corner of the steppe. Everyone knew that a new era had begun.
That day, Genghis Khan became the leader of an empire, not just a nation. That moment changed not only the Mongols, but also the course of world history. The winds of the steppe were now strong enough to change not just the direction of a nation, but of world history itself. And friends, that's when the world began to learn the name Genghis Khan. He was no longer just the leader of the Mongols. He was an emperor ready to conquer the world. The foundations of the Mongol Empire were laid, and this empire would become one of the greatest powers in world history. But this was just the beginning. Now it's time to explain how Genghis Khan expanded this empire and brought the world to its knees. Friends, now we're diving into one of the most thrilling, darkest, yet brightest times of the steppe. This is the tale of how Genghis Khan, or Temujin as he was known back then, took his first big steps toward fulfilling his destiny. Remember, as a young man, he had already united his tribe and defeated his enemies. But his ultimate goal was much grander: to unite all the scattered tribes of the steppe under a single banner. This was no small feat, because each tribe was like its own little kingdom, fiercely guarding its own interests and pride. They thought even the idea of coming under someone else's leadership was a sign of weakness. But Temujin, he was a great leader not just through sheer force but through his intelligence. His leadership was based on power, yes, but this power wasn't just about swords and spears. Temujin knew how to manage the human spirit. He didn't just rely on his sword to unite the tribes. Above all, he promised justice. He put justice and loyalty above everything. He understood that power wasn't only won on the battlefield. It was earned in hearts and minds. That's why, when he approached each tribe, he offered them two choices. They could either unite under his leadership, becoming part of the Mongol people, or they could fight against him and be destroyed. However, Temujin even promised justice to his enemies. If a tribe surrendered to him, he would protect them and uphold their rights. Loyalty and trust, that was the core of his strategy. And that's why people began to trust him. Temujin realized that uniting them wasn't just about spilling blood. He was creating a nation, and this nation needed to rally around a common goal to showcase the greatness of the Mongol people to the world. Of course, not every tribe immediately accepted this offer. Some opposed Temujin and refused to bow to his leadership. But Temujin fought fiercely against them as well. He didn't just defeat his enemies, he managed to bring them into his own ranks. He fought not just to defeat rivals, but to win them over to his cause. Even after their defeat, Temujin's enemies remained loyal to him. Because Genghis Khan didn't just conquer, he won people over. Friends, Temujin's strategy resonated across the steppe. As the tribes saw both his mercy and strength, they started joining him. Slowly his name echoed across the steppe. Tribes were no longer uniting to fight each other, but coming together to fight alongside Temujin. He was becoming more than just a leader, he was a symbol. The people understood that uniting under his leadership would bring them immense power. This power wasn't just military. He also brought order and security to his people. He promised a system where everyone was equal before the law, a revolutionary idea at the time. Instead of constant warfare and chaos, Temujin wanted to establish order. This would be the foundation of the Mongol Empire. And friends, that great day. The year was 1206. Leaders, warriors, scholars, and people from all over the steppe gathered by the Anan River for a grand assembly. This assembly was to decide the future of the Mongol people. Temujin was recognized not just as a leader but as a savior. Some loved him, some feared him, but everyone accepted one truth: Temujin was the leader who would change their world. In the midst of the assembly, all the tribal leaders came together and declared Temujin as Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan. This title represented not just a leader but an empire. Genghis Khan meant universal ruler. Temujin was now the founder of an empire that would spread across the world. This declaration wasn't just a title, it was the beginning of an era. It was the birth of the Mongol Empire. That moment echoed across every corner of the steppe. Everyone knew a new age had begun. On that day, Genghis Khan became the leader of an empire, not just a nation. That moment didn't just change the history of the Mongols, it altered the course of world history. The winds of the steppe were now powerful enough to change the direction of global history. And friends, it was at that moment that the world began to learn the name of Genghis Khan. He was no longer just the leader of the Mongols. He was an emperor ready to conquer the world. The foundations of the Mongol Empire were laid, and this empire would become one of the greatest powers in world history. But this was just the beginning. because now it's time to explore how Genghis Khan expanded this empire and brought the world to its knees. Ah, my children. Listen closely, because the story I'm about to tell you is about a grand march into lands that no one had ever seen or even imagined before. I'll talk about the day the Mongols set their sights west. Even the wind on the vast steppes couldn't have predicted this. The Mongol armies decided to push towards the endless horizons. This time, their goal was to break away from the magic of the East and reach the heart of the Khwarezmian Empire in Central Asia. Genghis Khan. Oh, what a great leader he was. Smart, patient, and relentless. After conquering northern China, he set his eyes on the west. But reaching those lands wasn't just a matter of warfare. It was a matter of intelligence and strategy. Genghis Khan was a master of war, but he also played the game of diplomacy perfectly. The Khwarezmian Empire was one of the powerful states in Central Asia at the time. Once a ruler of the riches of the Silk Road, this empire controlled trade routes and had immense power. Genghis Khan knew the value of trade very well. That's why he sought to establish friendly relations with Sultan Alabama ad-Din Muhammad, aiming for a peaceful approach. But, my children, sometimes fate prefers to carve out different paths. Trade caravans were prepared, and Mongol traders, like peace envoys, set out for Khwarezmian lands. But as a wise person, I must tell you not every peace offer, not every friendly gesture, is received the same way on the other side. Sultan Alabama ad-Din greeted the Mongol caravans with suspicion. This was a mistake, a grave mistake. The envoys and traders sent by Genghis Khan were killed on the orders of Sultan Alabama ad-Din. This incident was the last straw for Genghis Khan. As a wise person, I can tell you that some wars in history are inevitable, and this was one of them. Genghis Khan could never forgive such an insult. Killing envoys was one of the greatest crimes in Mongol culture. He immediately gathered his commanders and devised a long-term war plan. My children, back then, the Mongol army was not just a war machine, but also an incredible strategic force. Every unit of Genghis Khan's army moved in perfect harmony, like stars spinning in the sky. Each had a role to play and was part of the bigger picture. It was 1219 when Genghis Khan assembled his army. Spears glinted in the sun, and the hooves of the horses echoed on the ground. Genghis Khan's move westward was not just a concern for Sultan Alabama ad-Din, but for the entire world. The Khwarezmian Empire gathered its armies, strengthened its fortresses, but, my friends, from the perspective of a wise person, I must say you could not stop Genghis Khan with just a numerically superior army. His greatest weapon was his intelligence. The Mongols quickly entered Khwarezmian lands. Like the steppe wind, silent but deadly. The Khwarezmians initially underestimated the Mongols, but they realized this mistake too late. The Mongol armies were conquering cities one by one, each attack built upon the previous one. Genghis Khan had a genius. He defeated his enemies not just with the sword, but also with diplomacy and psychological warfare. As the Khwarezmian cities fell before Genghis Khan's armies, Sultan Alabama ad-Din Muhammad made another mistake. He abandoned his people and fled. Yes, the great Sultan fled, leaving his people behind. A leader should fight alongside his people, resisting the enemy together. At this point, Genghis Khan taught history a lesson. He pursued his fleeing enemy. Sultan Alabama ad-Din fled to the shores of the Caspian Sea. But fleeing changed nothing. The Mongols reached everywhere, looked under every stone, and came to the last place where Sultan Alabama ad-Din was hiding. The Sultan was left alone on an isolated island, face to face with his fears. And there the story ended. The fall of the Khwarezmian Empire was rooted in a betrayal that Genghis Khan never forgave. My children. As you sit here listening to this story, You might be thinking about how ruthless the Mongols were. But as a wise person, I want to remind you history is shaped not only by victories but also by mistakes. Sultan Alabama ad-Din's mistake was abandoning his people and underestimating his enemy. Genghis Khan was always a leader who learned from his lessons. The Khwarezmians disappeared from the stage of history, but the Mongols continued their stormy journey. Their advance westward would shake not just the Khwarezmians but the entire world. And so the Mongol armies expanding westward left behind not just destruction but also a whole new world. Remember this story, my friends, because every step reshaped history itself. My children, let me tell you another story. This time we'll journey to those ancient lands, the realm of the Persians. Oh, how magnificent those lands were. The spice-scented bazaars, the palatial palaces adorned with gold, the colossal mountains, they were like something out of a fairy tale. But within this fairy tale, a storm was brewing. Under Genghis Khan's leadership, the Mongol armies set out once more towards the horizon. This time the target was Persia, one of history's oldest and most established empires. At first, the Mongol army seemed almost satisfied with their conquests as they approached Persia. They had already subdued North China, the Khwarezmids, and Central Asia. Each of these places had been left in ruins, with defeated armies scattered behind. But the Persians, the Persians, my children, they were a different kind of civilization. Zoroastrian priests, stone inscriptions, mythological tales. Yet, unfortunately, history has its harsh rules. Power and ambition had found their match in this ancient civilization. Genghis Khan was also aware that the Khwarezmian Sultan Alaeddin, who had fled to Persian lands, was still alive. We've said before, fleeing doesn't solve anything, right, my children? Alaeddin's escape only fueled Genghis Khan's anger towards the Persian Empire. To him, Persian lands were not just a new conquest but an opportunity to send a message. He was determined to track down his enemies. The Khwarezmids' fate had been sealed, but the Persians had made a mistake by sheltering them. Thus the Mongol army set off once again from east to west, sweeping like the wind. When they first set foot on Persian soil, the enormous cities and mighty fortifications seemed even grander to the Mongol commanders. But Genghis Khan never lost his courage. He was always calm at the heart of the battle. He divided the army into 3 columns. Each column would advance through different routes in Persia, both surprising the enemy and attacking from multiple fronts. As a wise person, let me tell you, my children, this strategy might seem simple, but it was a stroke of genius for that time. As the Mongol armies approached the Persian cities, the Persian people grew increasingly terrified. The Persians had once been one of history's greatest empires. However, years of internal strife, power struggles, and weak leadership had eroded that empire. There was no longer a strong central authority. This presented an invaluable opportunity for the Mongols. One day, one of Genghis Khan's most trusted commanders, Subutai, approached an important fortress in Persia. Subutai. What a great commander. As a wise person, I must tell you that the commanders in Genghis Khan's army were also renowned for their intelligence. Subutai examined the defenses of the Persian fortresses, identified their weak points, and launched his attack. The Mongol siege tactics were so perfect that the Persians were caught off guard, and the walls came crashing down. Subutai swept through Persia like a hurricane. But this was just the beginning. With each victory, Genghis Khan's armies pressed further. Persian cities fell one by one, and the people writhed in desperation. How powerful the Persians once were. They were descendants of the great Cyrus. But time had weakened them. The Mongol army was disciplined, determined, and relentless. The Persians began to crumble under this merciless storm. One day, the Persian emperor saw his army rapidly dissolving before the Mongols. Soldiers couldn't keep up with the speed of the Mongol archers, and those defending the fortresses were helpless against the Mongol siege weapons. Ray, one of the wealthiest cities in the Persian Empire, fell into Mongol hands. This city had both strategic and symbolic importance for the Persians. But my children, symbols in history often bear the greatest wounds, don't they? When Ray fell, the Persian people finally realized how serious a threat the Mongols were. Genghis Khan gave a harsh lesson to the people of every city he conquered. His philosophy was clear: if you surrender, you live. If you resist, you die. And so, the Mongols instilled fear throughout the Persian Empire. Persian cities surrendered one by one, but those who resisted, their story became much darker. Yet, as a wise person, I must also say Genghis Khan was not just a warrior but also a revolutionary. He knew how to utilize the talents and wisdom of the people in the lands he conquered rather than destroying them. The Persians were advanced, especially in engineering and architecture. The Mongols took advantage of this knowledge to strengthen their own empire. Persian engineers brought from the cities played crucial roles in building Mongol cities and managing the empire. My children, this great campaign against Persian lands was not just a series of victories but also showed how broad Genghis Khan's vision was. His goal was not just to fight but to establish order in every land he conquered. The Mongol armies did not destroy the Persian Empire, they reshaped it. Yes, my children, thus ends this story. But remember, behind every victory lies a lesson. The Mongol campaign in Persia was not only a military success but also a cultural encounter. Genghis Khan's legend didn't end here. His eyes were always set on even greater horizons. My children. Now I'll take you to the misty and cold lands of the West, all the way to Europe. There were times when the sound of Mongol horse hooves echoed across the world. This time, Genghis Khan's descendants were continuing the path their ancestors had paved. As their empire expanded westward, heading toward the heart of Europe, they were about to undertake one of history's greatest and most terrifying campaigns, a Mongol storm sweeping through Russia, Poland, and Hungary. After Genghis Khan's death, his descendants continued to conquer the world with the same discipline and determination. Leading them was Batu Khan, one of the smartest and most fearless commanders in history. Batu Khan was Genghis Khan's grandson, and he was determined to follow in his grandfather's footsteps. Under his leadership, the Mongol armies crossed the Volga River and approached the gates of Europe. My children. Back then, Russia was divided into small principalities. Moscow, Novgorod, Kiev. Each was a city-state competing with the others. The Mongols, however, were advancing in a united and organized manner. In 1237, Batu Khan launched his first major assault on Russian lands. In the midst of winter, the Mongol army advanced through snow and ice, as if they were collaborating with nature itself. The Mongols were born in the harsh steppes. Severe climates couldn't stop them. The Russian principalities didn't know how to deal with such a disciplined army. Every army that tried to confront the Mongols was crushed like an avalanche. One of the first major blows was dealt to the Ryazan Principality. When the Mongol armies laid siege to Ryazan's walls, the people watched the smoke from the hills with dread. No matter how hard they resisted, it was impossible to stand against the Mongols' discipline and war machines. The siege began. Days turned into weeks. The Mongols advanced step by step, reaching the foot of Ryazan's walls, and eventually the city fell. Oh, what a bloody day that was. The city was destroyed, and the people, helpless, surrendered to the Mongols' mercy. The fall of Ryazan was a warning to the other Russian principalities. But the Mongol storm kept raging on. As Batu Khan pressed deeper into Russia, his army advanced like a snowstorm. By 1240 it was Kiev's turn. Kiev was one of the largest and most important cities of that time. My children, That magnificent city, with its golden domed churches, was once the pride of the region. But on the day the Mongols arrived at the gates, the people of Kiev faced their fate. The Mongols besieged the city, and Kiev fell quickly. The city was leveled, and the people were either slaughtered or enslaved. The fall of Kiev was a great disaster for all of Eastern Europe. In those days, people trembled at the mere mention of the Mongol name. But Batu Khan's campaign didn't end there. His eyes were set further west. He gathered his army and headed toward Poland. In 1241, when they entered Polish territory, the Mongol armies encountered Poland's defensive forces. Back then, Poland's defense forces were unprepared for the speed and ruthlessness of the Mongol army. One of the biggest blows in Poland was struck at Legnica, the Battle of Legnica. That day, Europe felt the Mongol fear in its very core. Poland's bravest warriors gathered against the Mongols. But, my children, sometimes courage isn't enough. The Mongol army was so well organized that they were like a war machine that annihilated every army in their path. In the Battle of Legnica, the Mongols won a decisive victory. The noble Polish knights perished under the rain of Mongol arrows. They fought so fast and effectively that the Poles didn't even know what hit them. By the end of the battle, the Mongols had planted their victory flags. However, Batu Khan didn't stop there. He continued his march westward, heading towards Hungary. Hungarian lands were among the most strategic places in Europe at that time. When King Bela IV of Hungary heard that the Mongols were coming, he desperately tried to rally his army. But keeping up with the speed of the Mongols was nearly impossible. When the Mongol army entered Hungary in 1241, they swept through the land like an unstoppable storm. And so, the great battle, known as the Battle of Mohi. My friends, what a tremendous destruction occurred at the Battle of Mohi. The Battle of Mohi changed Hungary's fate. The Mongols used clever strategies once again to defeat the Hungarian army. King Bela's forces tried to resist the Mongols' frontal attacks. But, my children, the Mongols didn't just fight directly. What made them truly dangerous was their strategic intelligence. While keeping the Hungarian army occupied, they secretly built bridges over rivers and launched attacks from the rear. The Hungarians were surrounded before they even knew what was happening and suffered one of the greatest defeats in history. Batu Khan's army swept through Hungarian lands like a hurricane. Villages were burned, cities looted, and people enslaved. Everywhere the Mongols went, there was fear and horror. King Bela barely escaped with his life, but his country was devastated. Hungary, once one of Central Europe's most powerful states, was shattered by the Mongol storm. My children, these campaigns not only changed Europe but the entire world. The Mongol armies reached the farthest corners of the earth and left behind shattered civilizations. But remember this too, the Mongols were not just a force of destruction. They also incorporated the knowledge, culture, and technology from the lands they conquered into their empire. Today, these Mongol campaigns extending to the west opened the way, not only for wars, but also for cultural exchanges. Batu Khan subdued Europe, but his campaigns didn't end here. The Mongols had grand plans the world would be under their control. But no matter how powerful you are, my children, fate sometimes works differently. Batu Khan's westward march was one of the last great expansion efforts of the Mongol Empire. Europe might have been spared from this storm, but the echoes of the Mongol name continued to be heard in these lands. My children. Now I'll tell you a story filled with sorrow. This period witnessed perhaps one of the most tragic moments in world history. Baghdad, the jewel of the East, and the brightest star of the Islamic world. Once a gathering place for scholars, poets, and philosophers, this ancient city was about to be destroyed by one of history's most horrific storms. And that storm was led by the relentless Mongol commander, Kublai Khan. Baghdad, in the mid-13th century, was under the rule of the Abbasid Caliph. Once the most powerful center of the Islamic world, this city was like a piece of paradise with its golden domes, libraries overflowing with endless books, and artisans mastering every form of art. At that time, Baghdad was the pinnacle of civilization. People came from all corners of the world to learn, scholars debated, and art and science flourished. But, my children, no civilization is safe forever. No matter how great the power, wealth, and knowledge, a storm will eventually come and destroy everything.